A production fee for your Hometown Health Connection was made by Buffalo Healthy Living Magazine and its sponsors. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. When you talk about the 3 keys to education, those are the age-old concepts you always hear. But after the school year ends, education shouldn't take a vacation, no matter what time of the year. Which leads to the question, do children read enough over summer or winter break? It's a simple question that Reading Rainbow television show creator Tony Buttino posed over 45 years ago at WBBZ-TV in Buffalo. Yet not even he could imagine the ripple effects it would have. In their new book, Creating Reading Rainbow, the Untold Story of a Beloved Children's Series, authors Barbara Irwin, Tony Buttino, and Pam Johnson share the extraordinary journey of the small local team that worked together to bring a historic series to life. Meet them on this special edition of our Community Conversation. Hello everyone, I'm John DeSciullo. Welcome to our community conversation about a worldwide phenomenon that was created right here in Western New York, and all based on that question we posed in the open: are children reading enough over the summer? For the next half hour, we're going to talk about Creating Reading Rainbow, the untold story of a beloved children's series. So let's meet our guests. Tony Buttino Sr. is best known for his leadership in the creation of the Emmy Award-winning public television series Reading Rainbow. Most of his 40 years working at WBBZ-TV were spent utilizing and marketing instructional television as a teaching and learning tool. Now, for his efforts, his colleagues affectionately refer to him as the father of ITV. A multi-year effort to use television to bridge the summer reading gap led to the creation of Reading Rainbow, which we'll talk about. And it began as a summer series on PBS with 6 million viewers at the time, all those beginning readers in its first season. The series went on to become a year-round sensation and was on television for 26 years, among the longest-running children's series on public television. Now, although as co-executive producer, Buttino garnered 5 Emmy Awards for Outstanding Children's Series, he says his biggest accomplishment is being able to reach youngsters through television and motivating them to read. We'll meet Tony in a minute. Barbara Irwin, Ph.D., is Professor Emerita of Communication. Is right, Emerita. Yeah, thank you. I'm learning along the way. Of Communication at Canisius University in Buffalo, New York, specializing in media studies. She taught courses in media and children, public broadcasting, media literacy. Dr. Irwin worked as a Reading Rainbow project coordinator, assistant in the Educational Services Department at WNED during the early years of the series. And in 2011, she was named a faculty fellow of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Foundation, frequently sought after by local and national media for interviews, and has appeared on National Public Radio, E! Entertainment Network, USA Today, and the Los Angeles Times, among others. And Dr. Irwin is an authority on daytime television and media history and co-authored the New York Times bestseller, The Young and the Restless, Most Memorable Moments and the Young and the Restless Special Silver Anniversary Collector's Edition, from Reading Rainbow to daytime drama. Pam Johnson, Ph.D., is Executive Director of Ready to Learn at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a school readiness program developed in partnership with PBS Kids, leading children's content producers, researchers in America's public media stations with funding from the U.S. Department of Education. Prior to joining the CBB, Dr. Johnson served as Vice President for Education and Engagement at WBBZ-TV, where she spearheaded learning services and advanced innovative initiatives, including Think Bright TV, the Buffalo Professional Development and Technology Center, and Reading Rainbow's national outreach and web priorities. With a passion for exciting children and their grown-ups about learning through media, Johnson shares all of that and started as a station intern working closely with her friend, Tony Buttino. And those are all a part of the early years of the show. So welcome. I wanted to read all those bios because if our viewers didn't know who you are, they know now, and they have this incredible background on who you are and the impact you've made in education. But Tony, here we are. We were across the street when I was at Channel 7, and WNED was down the road. And before that on Barton Street, and you were the creator of the show because of that question. What made you ask that question, and when did you do that?
Well, I remember, actually 1977 was a year I can think of. That's when Roots was broadcast, and we had the blizzard in Buffalo, and there's a combination of books and reading. That's the first time it made an impression on me. And somewhere along the way, we decided to concentrate on reading, and I came across the summer loss phenomenon, where kids don't read during the summer, and you go back to school, and the teachers have to spend a number of weeks bringing them back up. So I walked into my one of the offices, Nikki Scher, and I asked her that question, as a matter of fact. And she said, no, probably not. And I'm thinking at that time, because I've gone through instructional television, I knew that kids could learn from television, and I'm thinking, you know, maybe we could do something about that. Maybe we could bridge that summer reading gap and build a bridge to motivate the kids to read, actually.
So the concept really started with the question, are
Yes.
kids reading a lot?
Yes.
Then you went through this journey
Oh, wow.
and connecting with so many people.
Right.
We don't have enough time to talk about everybody
Yes.
along the way, but
Yes.
it wasn't a situation where somebody just said, let's do a show like, you know,
No.
Mickey Rooney and Judy
No,
Garland.
it
You had to go through a process.
It started small.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when you think of television and reading and librarians, you know, we were kind of like separated quite a bit. I mean, library, well, I shouldn't say that, but, you know, they told people to kids turn their TV set off and, you know, read a book. Well, I was trying to bridge that gap. So I went to reading teachers and librarians and kind of like talk the way we're talking now about, you know, maybe television. You know, Dr. Bill Eller from the University of Buffalo was on one of my committees. He was president of the International Reading Association. And he said, you know, show me a kid who reads, and I'll show you a better reader. Motivate them to read. Do what television does best. I said, okay, we don't have to teach skills or, you know, letters and words and all that. We'll just try to motivate them, get them to read some books. And that's exactly how this kind of thing started.
And Barbara, it would seem to me that this was a natural, because on PBS at that time, locally on WNED, you had Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, Zoom, Electric Company. These are the shows that I remember as a kid. So Reading Rainbow would seem to make sense to fit into that cachet at that time.
Right, and it fit in a different way, because Sesame Street obviously was designed for younger children. Electric Company was designed to teach phonics and skills. And as Tony said, Reading Rainbow wanted to do something different, and that was to motivate children to read. And it was aimed at beginning readers.
And what do you remember about your connection to Reading Rainbow, and what did you do at that time?
I was a project assistant at WNED and worked on local promotion of the series and national promotion of the series. I worked on some of the book review segments that were produced in Buffalo at WNED-TV with local children, and worked on some community outreach. We had a Reading Rainbow van that traveled around for initially the first season 8 weeks, and by the time it wrapped up, it was a 5-month venture where the van went out to schools and libraries and parks and the Erie County Fair and everywhere to introduce kids to the series and to the books.
Yeah, great idea to do that outreach. And Pam, so let's talk a little bit about the sort of the length of the show. It started in 1983 and it ran until 2009 for 26 years about. And television was very different back then. You know, the impact that television had. I mean, television is still very impactful, but not like it was. And even though educational television, public television garnered an audience, it's a different time. The influence, talk to me about that and where that length of the time made such an impact.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, one of the things we write about in the book is that we didn't know that Reading Rainbow would become the phenomenon that it did, right? And as it was growing, it was really important for Tony and the other partners to really work closely with all the public TV stations across the country. And the fact that something like Reading Rainbow was national and local, and stations all across the country were working with their local librarians, working with their local school teachers and families to encourage kids to enjoy the show. It had this phenomenal growth period. And Reading Rainbow just got bigger and bigger. And I think the nature of the show itself, the nature of LeVar, the fact that it was highlighting all these children's books, all these diverse books, teachers just swarmed. They went to it. It was like a magnet. And public librarians, you know, went to it. It was a magnet. And so I think children were experiencing it at home. They were experiencing it in programs at school and in the community. And its influence became so significant. And you're right, television plays and played a significant role in everybody's lives. And with a role model like LeVar as host, he was speaking to children. And they were really trusting him and wanting to go on these adventures with him. And for their teachers and for their librarians, they were loving how the show took a book, took the theme of the book, and then branched out into this incredible field trip and these journeys. And that resonated with kids, and it resonated with educators, no matter where they were in the community.
So we talked about LeVar. We're talking about LeVar Burton, who was the host of the show. And we'll get more into the story of LeVar Burton in a little bit. But let's talk a little bit, Tony, about the fact that did it start just as a local show and then become national? What was the journey there? And always with LeVar, right?
It started local with nobody, as a matter of fact. And I had ideas that I wanted a person like Mr. Rogers. We didn't have anybody.
Mr. Rogers, so iconic.
Mr.
Still
Rogers,
is.
yeah. I mean, I didn't want, not some sort of animal or walkabout, whatever they called it. I wanted a real person like Mr. Rogers that could be sincere when he spoke to the kids. So we started with just programs that we saw that were kind of good for reading, motivating to reading. One of them was Studio C, which handed out transcripts. We motivated the kids to pick up transcripts. That first summer didn't go very well, as a matter of fact, but I got a nice letter from Diane Chrisman of the library group. And she said pretty much like, yeah, it didn't go well. We had, a few libraries, a few schools, but let's do it again. Let's do it next summer.
They saw the spark.
Yes, I mean, sure, give her a lot of credit because I probably would have maybe dropped out. But she sparked it, and I said, okay. She was thinking about 30 libraries that might be involved in a reading teacher. So we started, and then we kept going each summer for 5 summers with different ideas. I went to see Mr. Rogers. I kind of thought of a summer vacation group with him, knowing full well he wasn't going to do that. But he gave us Dave Newell, who's Mr. McFeely. So we did a series of programs with him. Talking about books and talking about, doing crafts and things like that. We had some little programs in between. There were, different segments for different things. But so then eventually, we got to the point where we could get some money and maybe find somebody and
well, I'm glad you stuck with it. I'm glad that the people at WNED and PBS stuck with it, because sometimes in television you hear about, it starts, it doesn't get a rating, and poof, it's gone. Yeah. And in this case, that wasn't the case. So
yes, that's correct.
Stick with it. Now, Dr. Irwin, you've been an instructor at Canisius, and did any of the students that you taught grow up with Reading Rainbow? Did they ever intersect with you on that?
They did. So first day of class every year, I would introduce myself to my students and say, and I worked on Reading Rainbow. And, their faces would light up. They were really excited about that. Interestingly, though, they kind of aged out. So the show went off the air in 2009. I was still teaching up until just last year. But my more recent students, some of them did not know Reading Rainbow. Yeah. But the ones who did know it would start singing theme song.
Yeah. Well, and you hear the music. And we'll play that in the next segment, and it brings back memories, just as the theme to Sesame Street does. You just have that. It's like a flashback. And Pam, I mean, even Jimmy Fallon gave it a homage on the Tonight Show, right?
He did. He created a song. He had a fun time doing his own version of the song, and it had millions of views. It was a phenomenon, right?
Well, and I think that's why it's important to get the book, because for some people, like you said, it's going to be a throwback to your youth. For others, like me, it's a journey of finding out how you put this TV show together.
Very good. Yes,
the inner workings of that.
Yes.
And Pam, just the whole concept of how media can work to do good, and you're still doing that at the Corporation of Public Broadcasting.
Yeah, I would say, for me, I'm an educational media, public media, nerd, as what I would say. And for me, this book is about the history of educational television, of public media, and it carries with it the mission of a local station, to really listen to its community and see what the needs are. And can television and now can multi-platform media be a response to that? And the landscape has changed a lot in television. It's really a multimedia, multi-platform environment, but children are so facile at all of the mobile media, and they really navigate really well. And I would say from public media's vantage point, PBS Kids and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, I mean, it's a healthy environment. We've got a tremendous collection of resources that are just doing phenomenally well. in literacy, in math, in science, in civics and democracy, in social emotional learning, you name it. We've got the whole child covered through media that people trust, and that's free.
Yep, and been there for years.
And it's been there for years, right.
Well, when we come back, Tony's going to tell us about how the title came to be, and we'll share more stories about one of the longest running and acclaimed television experiences that was Buffalo's own. We'll be right back.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can go anywhere, friends to know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow. I can be anything. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. A reading rainbow. A reading rainbow. A reading rainbow. A reading rainbow.
How about that? Welcome back. We have our guests, Dr. Pam Johnson, Dr. Barbara Irwin, and Tony Buttino Sr. as we talk about their new book about the Reading Rainbow. And Barb, the theme song, you wrote a little bit in the book about it. What's the significance of that story in the theme song?
This theme song is so iconic and is the thing that most people remember. And it was written by, composed by Steve Horlick. Janet Weir and Dennis Kleinman wrote the lyrics. Interestingly, the lyrics that we know were not the original lyrics of the song. And it was sung so famously by a woman named Tina Fabrique, who was a jazz singer, had a very stellar career as a jazz singer, and she's known as the Reading Rainbow Lady.
Yeah. Funny, you don't hear that in TV shows anymore. The iconic themes, whether it's public or commercial television, it was kind of, those days are gone. Tony, tell me about the title of the program. Who came up with that title, and how did that all come to be?
We had an internship program at Channel 17, and this lovely lady, Debbie Dennis, was my intern, studying production and education. So I had some ideas about a Reading Rainbow program. I kind of like the host and a lot of ideas like that. And I told her a little bit about, the motivating the reading, which was brought up by our committees and all that. And that was her assignment. I sent her off and said, come back with a paper of some sort. And she did. She came back and she did. She titled it Reading Rainbow. She says, because reading is like the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. I said, oh, that's beautiful.
That's brilliant.
I almost took out the word reading because I'm thinking, I don't think kids will like the idea of reading, math, school thing. But then after some discussion, I said, well, okay, let's leave it in. Let's leave reading. Happy. I mean, who can come up with a song like Rainbow or something? Well, maybe there are songs like that.
Anything's possible, but I'm glad you kept it in. It makes sense and a legacy. And great for Debbie to come up with. I hope you gave her an A in that.
Yes, it was wonderful.
So we talked about Mr. Rogers, and he said, no, I'm busy in Pittsburgh. I've got, Mr.
Right.
McFeely with me. And,
Yes.
But LeVar Burton, you mentioned in 1977, it was an iconic year for Buffalo. The blizzard,
Isn't it something?
Everybody watched Roots on ABC, and LeVar Burton was the star with so many others.
Yes.
And so how did you get him? And why LeVar Burton?
I'm going to let them talk about the get him. But the thing that was amazing is here we're watching him, and years later I meet him for the first time on the set of Reading Rainbow. But Barb wrote about it in the book.
So the journey with LeVar Burton, and diverse, back in those days, a man of color to host a show like that. There was Gordon on Sesame Street, and there were there's diversity in the Zoom kids and Electric Company, but this was a real journey. It
was a groundbreaking idea to have an African-American man host a children's show. LeVar was in New York. The producers saw him on a local talk show, called an associate producer and said, go get him. Everybody knew who LeVar was, and they just said he kind of jumped off the screen during this interview. He was actually on his way to a whitewater rafting trip on the Zambezi River in Africa for American sportsmen. So they managed to connect with his manager and with LeVar just before he left the country. LeVar was always interested in doing mission-oriented kinds of work, and he saw this as a no-brainer. He said, if there's a way to connect television and use it to motivate children to read, I'm on board. Let's do it. He came back from his whitewater rafting trip to the New York airport, got a car, took him directly to the set of the pilot episode, and he walked on the set. Nobody from the team had ever met him before.
Wow.
And so Cecily Truitt, the producer, said, what can we get you? What can we do for you? And he said, I would love to have a glass of orange juice and a toothbrush. And they got those things for him, and then they went on to produce the pilot
Wow, it
episode
doesn't take
that
much
day.
for LeVar.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, great story, and it almost seems as if he wasn't just a host. He really bought into the whole concept and owned it.
Yes.
He wasn't just a hired hand.
And he still owns it.
I was going to say.
As an advocate for literacy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it garnered a lot of awards, Emmys.
Yes.
Biggest award in television. Tony, what was that like?
Oh my gosh.
Kid from Buffalo?
Yeah, kid from South Buffalo goes to an Emmy with the red carpet and all that, and food and everything else there. It was new. It was different. It was, there we are with the Young and the Restless crowd, because we had a daytime Emmy, so it was a daytime soap operas and screaming, young people there. It's just so different. It's another world for a person like me.
Well, you're a very humble man.
Thank you.
From Buffalo. What motivated you to want to get into television? How did you do that?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I went to Bishop Timon High School, and I was in the stage shows, and I was backstage working stage crew, and I was doing something about in the chorus, and Father Kenneth Dorr took me out. He said, you're very loud, Tony, so I'm going to give you a solo. So it gives me a solo, and honest to God, I mean, I froze. Good thing I had 4 Mount Mercer girls holding me up. And I said, that's when I decided to go backstage, go out for not drama, but television and radio at Ithaca College. And that was how I started.
The rest is history, as they say.
The rest is
Because you
history.
were a staple. I remember, as I said, when we were at Channel 7 and you were at Channel 17. And
That's right.
Our friend Leah DeCenza.
Sure.
So, Pam, let's go back to you. So here we are. We're talking about the Reading Rainbow, and we're talking about people who helped put it on the air. And I think we should make mention of Michael J. Collins,
Absolutely.
who was the head guy there, and then later Don Boswell, and now it's Tom Calderon, a pal. So what influence on the corporate side did that make for the Reading Rainbow? I mean, I would have to think that people on the corporate level said either we're going to go with this or we're not. I mean, they could have made or broken it any time.
Totally. It was, I'm a firm believer in the power of leadership, right? And nonprofit leadership, educational media leadership, and those individuals have played really important and play really important roles in the history of public television and WNED. And, Mike Collins speaks really eloquently about not knowing that this was going to be the treasure that it became, but it did. But they knew they were onto something, and how natural it was for them to just keep pursuing it. It just was right to keep pursuing it, and how he welcomed the partnership with others to make it bigger. So, Mike played an essential role. Don Boswell too. Don Boswell is an extraordinary community activist, and using media as a tool for community growth and development. That's really a feature of his career. He's an excellent fundraiser, and he played a really important role in a number of the years as the series goes on. And he had such friendships with people at PBS and so forth that he was very important to preserving and protecting and thinking about how to keep Reading Rainbow sustained. And it becomes very difficult to sustain a children's series as you get to year 24, 25, 26, and so forth, right? And Tom now comes in a new media landscape. He is an expert in today's media environment. He's charged, I'm sure, by the board to really think about how to reinvent public media for today's times. And he holds the treasure also in his hands. We've talked about that in our acknowledgments. These individuals were part of a leadership continuum. They all play an important role, and preserving and protecting Reading Rainbow and helping it grow to whatever its next thing will be. We tried very hard in the book not to put pressure on anyone to say you got to make it do something next. We didn't say that in the book. We chose not to say that, because we don't work there anymore. but it is a treasure, and
It's
you
a
know,
great treasure. And-
yeah,
and it's sort
yeah,
of
and it's still playing a very important role right now.
Oh, sure.
And it will continue to, yet to be continued.
Well, holding that public trust is something. I mean, even with a local station like WBBZ, I mean, we take that very seriously. You have to give back to the community that helps
Right.
you. Barbara, you've been an instructor for a number of years. There's a gentleman on the radio, Tom Puckett on WBEN, and he was one of the first young people to do a book review. And we were just talking before the show. You knew instantly he was the spark that was going to move forward.
He was precocious. He was very bright. He was outgoing. And his book review is actually the very first one that appears in the premiere episode of Reading Rainbow. And he wanted to make it his own, and he did. And so he ended his review with "Get your hands on it," and with a gesture that went along with that. And he also was part of a 3-child group that went with Tony and Pam to New York for the launch of the series. And LeVar was, I guess the story goes, LeVar was doing an interview with the New York Times. Tom happened to be a reporter at the age of 9 with the local Lackawanna newspaper.
He had a press pass.
Yeah.
He had a press pass.
And he apparently interrupted an interview between the New York Times and LeVar Burton to ask a question.
And the rest is history.
and he's still doing it today.
That's right. The rest is
Let's
history.
talk about the butterfly effect. I see that in the book. What does that mean?
Well, it means, I guess there's some more scientific meaning to it, but for me, it's the ripple effect that, you throw a stone in the water and it moves out there. I mean, our projects, like you said, started local in Buffalo. I moved it with some awareness projects and campaigns to New York State stations, who I knew pretty well. New York State stations, I was part of the Eastern Educational Television Network with some 30 some odd stations. They bought into this whole idea. And then along the way, we got some money from Corporation Public Broadcasting. They hired, I think, a PBS publicist to help promote instructional television. And, the thing went, summer series was a summer series to start with, motivate the kids to read in the summer. Now we end up with 155 programs that played, around
For 26 years.
26 years.
It's sort of
exactly.
underrated in Buffalo, I think, a little bit. I think we tend to maybe not make as much of this as we should. So I'm glad the book is out. We have about a minute left. And Tony, what does this mean to you to have this book come out? Here's this
Well, I think
idea that you
the
have.
book describes the beginnings of what's happening. Everybody knows about LeVar and the programs when it went on in 1983. This is the stuff that came on starting probably in 1965 when I became instructional television coordinator at Channel 17, moved along the way and learned a few things and came up with, a final program for something that's national.
And now we can read about it. Pam, you have the last word.
Well, thank you. Having the book out into the world is like, it's a joy, it's a treasure, and I would say it is an untold story. And often the early history of how something gets going, isn't always shared. And I consider Tony to be a bit of a hidden figure in the story of Reading Rainbow. So it's an honor to have worked on this together.
Yeah. Well, it was great to have you all here. We
Same
could go
here.
on for days. Barbara Irwin, Ph.D., Pam Johnson, Ph.D., and Tony Buttino, Sr., a guy from South Buffalo, came up with this big show, authors of Creating Reading Rainbow, The Untold Story of a Beloved Children's Series. We thank you for joining us on our community
you.
conversation. Good luck with the book. And where is it available?
Anywhere books are sold.
Anywhere books
Books
are
are
sold.
sold.
Amazon.com,
Yeah, that too.
Barnes & Noble, Talking Leaves.
That's right.
Come to Tony's house. He'll sell you the book. Thank you
There
all
you go.
for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
That's fun.